Okay, today we're going to talk a little bit more about ecology, and we're going to start with habitat versus niche. The habitat is the place where the organism lives, and the niche is sort of the role, the job that it has in the community. Basically, a niche is determined by limiting factors, and limiting factors are biotic or abiotic factors that could resist the existence of organisms in a specific environment. So it could be predators, it could be based on disease, and so on. If we look at some feeding relationships that are out there, there's a producer with a consumer, there's the predator-prey relationship, and a parasite and a host. We're just going to talk about a couple of them. If we look at a producer, producers are definitely plants. They're considered to be autotrophs, and they basically produce their own food through photosynthesis that we learned about in the beginning of the year. And if we look at them in a food chain, they're always the first or the bottom sort of row. They're the first thing to start a food chain out. If we look at consumers, there's several different types of consumers. Consumers are what we call heterotrophs, so they're not autotrophs. They can't go make their own food. They have to basically go find their food and search for it, and they ingest food that does contain energy from the sun, because anytime that you eat plants, you are getting that great amount of energy being passed from the plant to you. There's herbivores that just eat plants, carnivores that just eat meat, omnivores that eat meat or that eat plants and animals, and decomposers that decompose the remains of dead organisms. So if we look at this consumer, this is obviously showing you a cow, and the cow is a herbivore. The cow will eat the plants. We consider it a primary consumer, and it's one of the animals that could be preyed upon. If we look at this picture, this is a picture of a shark. A shark is definitely a meat eater. It's not going to eat any of the plants. So we consider it a carnivore. It only eats meat. It is a predator. It's going to hunt and try to hunt its prey for food. Another carnivore that just is going to eat meat would be a scavenger. And scavengers are going to feed on the dead remains of organisms. We have omnivores that are like us. Bears are also considered to be omnivores. So there's the picture of the bear. And we eat both plants and animals, so we definitely have more of a variety in our diet. Then we have decomposers. These are like your mushrooms. These are bacteria. They're going to break down the remains of the dead organisms and basically make them into simpler molecules that can be absorbed and return the nutrients to the soil. We're going to skip over this because we don't need to know about these symbiotic relationships. And we're going to go right to trophic levels. This is going to bring us right into a food chain and a food web. Each link in a food chain is known as a trophic level. And trophic levels represent a feeding step in the transfer of energy and matter in the ecosystem. We always say that energy flows through a food chain or a food web, and materials are always going to cycle through. So if we look at the biomass, this is the amount of organic matter comprising of a group of organisms in a habitat. And as you move up a food chain, both available energy and biomass decrease. The energy is transferred upwards, but it's diminished with each transfer. So every time you go up sort of that food level chain, your energy that's available will decrease and the biomass will decrease. You can see that in this picture. If we look at our energy levels, we have our producers. They always have the greatest amount of energy because it comes from the sun. And then as we all get all the way up to the fourth level or the top carnivores, you're going to see that that box is less than the yellow one at the bottom, because as we go from one level to the next, we do lose energy, and we lose energy in the form of heat. This is another picture showing 100%, and then consumer 2 has 1% of that biomass. Here's just another picture, and this is, again, what we call an energy pyramid diagram of a food web. We always start with the producer. We're always going to end with the decomposer too. It doesn't show that here, but we would always end with the decomposer because decomposers will break down the remains of all living things that will one day die. If we look at this simple food chain, It's just a simple model. It shows how the matter and energy move through the ecosystem. So we have algae, we have some aquatic crustaceans, we have fish, and then we have raccoons. And I always tell you that the direction of the arrowhead, if you were with me on the last meet, it's always going to point to the organism that's getting the energy because it eats the thing before it. If we look at this picture here, we have the sun again, and that's going to start with the producer, and then we go right down to our grasshopper, our snake, our hawk, and then we'll end with our fungi, because those are decomposers and they'll always break down the remains of the dead organism. So the grasshopper gets energy by eating the grass, the snake gets energy by eating the grasshopper, and so on, and that energy is moving. If we look at a food webs, this is going to show all of the possible feeding relationships in a community. To me, it's just food chains that get messy. So you take a bunch of food chains and you put them in this big diagram, and now you have a food web, because we just don't eat one thing, right? We just don't have chicken for breakfast and chicken for lunch and chicken for dinner. We have a variety. So it represents a network of interconnected food chains. And it looks like this. To the left is a food chain, just one path of energy. To the right is all possible energy paths. You can see it's definitely messy, and we could pull a bunch of food chains out of it. Here's another picture of a food web. Here's another one. And this one is the last one we're going to show, I think. Nope, that was one more. That was the last one, but I'm going to go back to this one for a minute, because again, you can see all of the different ways that food can, well, I should say that energy could be passed, because when you eat the thing before it, you're the one getting the energy. You're the one that gets in the direction of the arrowhead. Okay, that's all for today.